Disc 9.
Ross Dennis comes across and puts his big arms around them. He looks around, not comfortable with what he's doing, but doing it nonetheless. It makes Staffe want to respect him, just for now. But as he is looking around, Dennis clocks Staffe. He double-takes, and his face goes hard as if he could kill. His lip curls, and he doesn't blink. Staffe smiles, and Dennis mouths something that might be, "Stay away." He looks different, and Staffe feels that he could somehow trust him. But he quickly reminds himself that his mind has been altered, that he shouldn't entirely trust himself. To Dennis's left, Deborah Bowker walks up to Leanne. She walks with her back straight in short stiletto steps. She's wearing a tailored frock coat and a matching black miniskirt. Her hair shines and her nylon legs shimmer. She crouches, back still straight, and puts her arm around the children. They respond, wrapping their arms around her. Leanne Colquhoun moves her hand towards Deborah Bowker and takes a hold of her shoulder. She rubs Deborah's neck, and Deborah looks up at her. They smile sadly at each other. Tears smudge Leanne's mascara. Still, Dennis looks at Staffe, beseeching him to go away. Staffe considers the possibility that the world is a better place for Jessup having betrayed his law. These poor people are now somehow coming together in a safer world. In the shade of the yew, he says an instant prayer for Sally and Tyrone Watkins, for Nico and Greta Cashel, and thanks God that Jessup got to Tanya Ford in time, so many steps ahead of the wheels of justice. But can it be right? And if it is right, then what does he do with his own life? Smethurst and Pulford have been talking. "We're still holding her," says Smethurst. "Holding who?" says Staffe. "Greta Cashel," says Smethurst. "I checked up on Nicoletta's counselling history. She only went for a few weeks, then Greta signed her off. So I sent someone to interview her down in Hastings at her grandparents' place, but she wasn't there. They said she went missing over 2.5 years ago, not long after Nico went down. Greta lied." "Oh, Christ," says Pulford. "She held Jessup responsible for getting that confession out of Cashel, and when Nicoletta disappears, she gets hooked on revenge. Lottie Stenson was already dead, so she uses Vabber." "She uses Vabber to source the victims," says Pulford. "And Jessup's motives?" "The bloody fool. He didn't know how much he'd bitten off. My guess is that when he got Stenson's charges dropped, he knew what Nico would do. But Nico can't bring himself to do it, so they come up with that mad pact. When Cashel gets sent down and Greta finds out about Jessup, she starts to blackmail him. Says she'll tell the authorities unless he does more, for Vabber." "You put them on to Jessup, Rick." Staffe looks Johnson straight in the eye. He doesn't sound angry. He says it as if he's saying Canberra is the capital of Australia. Johnson looks at the ground, chews at his lip. Smethurst looks at Staffe as if he doesn't really know him. "You should hear Greta Cashel when she talks about what happened to Colquhoun and Montefiore. She gets high on it. You heard what Deborah Bowker said about her. It's all consistent with a different truth." "What?" Smethurst turns to Pulford, says, What's he on?" Pulford says, "We should go, sir." "What does Greta say about the fourth quadrant?" says Staffe. "What?" "The website." "Ah." Smethurst looks at Staffe as though he is ailing for something. Staffe scratches at his head and talks as if someone behind the scenes is feeding him lines. If your man has slipped the country and still a fourth one dies, that wouldn't be good. Staffe recalls someone telling him the website was set up in Guy's name from his address. He feels light, his feet still not quite touching the sun-parched golden grass beneath. Deborah Bowker and Leanne Colquhoun walk away from Carl's grave, linking arms. Smethurst is saying something else now. He's getting irate, thinks Staffe. He knows it would probably be better to get his head straight, but he beckons Smethurst for a private word, walks away from under the yew-shade. Something will happen to Montefiore, and there will be a fourth victim, says Staffe, turning round to make sure Pulford and Johnson can't hear what he's saying to Smethurst. Look, Will, I don't know what you're on, but take it from me, you let this sleeping dog lie. You know Jessup didn't do it. Smethurst looks round. I know nothing of the sort. You need to watch what you're saying, Will. Take some rest. Did you help him get away? You should go home. He was your friend, for Christ's sake. All I want is the truth. Smethurst leans forward, hisses into Staffe's ear. There's no such thing. There's just the stuff that people tell you, that's all there is. Now, I don't know what you think the game is here, but we've got our man. What if there's another killing? Well, we can't be sure Jessup's not still around. And anyway, he's gone crazy out there. Who's to say what people might do to copy him? There's a fourth quadrant. You've seen the website. Well, that could be Jessup. It could be anybody. Those images of Colquhoun and Montefiore have been published. Anybody could use them. Staffe turns his back, beckons Pulford towards him. Watch yourself, Will, calls Smethurst. What was that name, Sergeant? He says to Pulford. The young black girl. It was a Tom Jones song. Spears. Martha Spears was the girl. The mother was Delilah. Staffe looks back at Smethurst. He's talking to Johnson and losing his rag. Johnson looks as if he can't take much more. Did you say Janine is coming? Says Staffe. As he says her name, he remembers she has Johnson's syringe. We're meeting her at my flat. Staffe looks all around, back at the graveyard, across to the flats behind and the broad hint of London spreading itself out to the blue horizon. So many lives. Walking back to Pulford's MR2, Staffe stops, turns to see the young sergeant stock still by a newsstand. The guy pushing the news looks at his own gear, then at Staffe. Back to the paper. On the front page is a photograph of Staffe, looking worse for wear. The headline says, Ex-Staffe. Beneath, the strapline is, Fiddling cop off the case. Arrests will now follow. Pulford comes towards him, newspaper in hand, and wraps an arm around and turns him to face the MR2. The lights flash on and off. The car makes a beeping noise. Pulford shows Staffe the passenger side, and once Staffe has bent his frame into the low seat, the DS shuts the door gently. Staffe tries to work out when and where the photograph was taken. The hanging baskets in the background are from the Steeles. The jacket is the one he's wearing now. The stubble is a day behind. Bastards? He says it quizzically, as if he's unsure whether he is right. The story dissects everything that has gone wrong with the case. It suggests Staffe has been protecting a suspect. He looks up at Pulford. Fiddling? What do they mean? Pulford says, like Nero, while London burns. "Nero," says Staffe. He stares out of the window, as if in a trance, at people, shops, building sites, schools, offices, some trees beyond. Staffe says, "Do you have to stick me?" "It'll be faster this way," says Janine, tapping at Staffe's bare upper arm with the second and third fingers of her left hand. She holds the syringe between her teeth, as if it might be a rose. "What is it?" says Pulford. "An ampakine. Kind of like modafinil, but industrial strength." Staffe sits on a dining chair in Pulford's flat, his face riven with fear. His shirt is pulled off, draped at his feet. "I hate needles." Janine takes the syringe from between her teeth. "Be a brave boy," she says. She holds the needle aloft, gets some liquid out and eyes Staffe's upper body. He looks after himself, but you'd still have him at 40 plus. He could do with a haircut. It suits him long, but the layers have grown out. His body goes tense as she takes aim at the reddened skin she's been softening up, and as she slides the needle in, his whole body quivers, as if he's in the last throes of something. She pulls it out, and his body goes slack. "I gave you a needle," says Staffe. She says to Pulford, "It'll take hold very quick. Get a glass of water and mix it up with a tablespoon of sugar and a teaspoon of salt. You'll need to be vigorous." Staffe gets up from the chair and looks around the room as if he's clocking it for the first time. His legs go weak, and he reaches out for the sofa, flops onto it. His chest rises and falls, high and deep, and he starts to blink. Janine pulls up a chair and crosses her legs, clasps her hands together in front. "It was morphine. The syringe you gave me, you thought it was smack, but it was only morphine." "Only?" He looks up at her. "I'm thirsty." Janine takes the glass from Pulford and holds it for him as he guzzles it back in one. He leans forward, elbows on his knees, fingers pulling at his hair. After a minute or so, he looks up, wide-eyed, jaw set. "I'm not buying that confession." "No way," he says. "But you were on to Jessup yourself, sir." "It's written in his hand," says Janine, "and the ink matches a sample from his flat. There's a DNA fit on a hair we found on the gum of the envelope. Jessup wrote it, Staffe." "Now, that's not what I'm saying. He's lying. Fitting himself up for a murder he didn't commit. Just like Nico Cashel," says Pulford. "Yes!" Staffe stands up, starts pacing around the room. Janine and Pulford find a corner each and wait for him to knock into something, but his movement is lucid. "Just like Cashel." "Sir, could it be? I don't know." Pulford can't bear to look his DI in the eye. "Spit it out." "Well, Smethurst has pinned it on Jessup, but he's got away by the looks of things. It was your case, and now it looks like it won't be cracked. I'm sorry, sir, but maybe you just don't want to let it go." Staffe smiles at Pulford. "But it's not cracked. Give me that note, and you get yourself off to see what's her name. What's her name? Delilah? Delilah Spears." Staffe nods, already deep in the text of Jessup's note. His eyes flit rapidly from side to side. "Or perhaps you just can't bear for it to be your friend," says Janine. "I remember you two when I first joined forensics." She looks at Pulford and winks. "He was only a young pup." "Well, of course I don't want it to be him. That's no rocket science." "No, it's semi-professional psychology. And you'd be to blame, wouldn't you, Staffe? A bit more blood on your hands, eh?" "What do you mean?" what Nick or Cashel tried the other night? It seems like all the wrong people are suffering, doesn't it? She looks at him, waits for him to look back. When he does, she softens her face, makes the slightest smile, and says, "Putting yourself in the mix won't help anyone, Will. Cut yourself some slack. You're in deep enough by withholding what you had on Jessup." "They suspended me. And anyway, he didn't do it. Here's the proof." He holds up Jessup's note. "Here's the bloody proof." Staffe waves the note and starts to pace the room again, reading extracts from the note aloud. "You've got me, but you haven't. See? Nothing's what it seems. That's what he's saying. I know it." "He's just saying he got away. That's all." Pulford looks at Janine, raises his eyebrows. "It's a riddle. All I can say is things got out of hand, turned on their head. Don't you see? Turned on their head. Don't believe what you see. Cashel didn't kill Stenson, but he confessed. And now Jessup's repeating history. The law is an ass, but you won't pin a tail on this old donkey. He's even written it as a riddle. If he didn't kill Colquhoun and torture Montefiore, who did? And what about the website?" says Pulford. "Exactly. He could never set up a website. He doesn't even have a computer, never did. He refused to have an email address." "Well, he had an accomplice. Greta Cashel, according to Smethurst." "They've let Jessup get away and he'll cop for the lot. Except he never will. Case closed." Staffe switches out of the conversation, sits on the edge of the sofa and stares deep into the note. "Did you get that read on his bank account? It said J on the stub." "Josie's coming over with it when your sister gets back," says Pulford. "Did you see the way Leanne Colquhoun and Deborah Bowker and Ross Dennis are at the graveside? Like happy families. But they'd have us believe they can't stand each other." "It's a funeral, Staffe. People don't fall out at funerals." "Fat lot you know then," says Staffe. "Give Josie another ring. Tell her to get her skates on." He puts his shirt back on. "I'm going to get to the bottom of all this. It's my job, for crying out loud." He runs his hands through his hair and goes to the window. Looks out. "My job," he says to himself, wondering what would be left of him if they took that away. Monday night. Earlier, before his remedication at the hands of Janine, Staffe was calm as a tripped-out hippie. Now he is up to the window and back again every couple of minutes, waiting for Josie to arrive at Pulford's flat. Far away, it looks as though someone has smeared black across the sky, all along the horizon like a primitive painting. Down in the street, Josie parks up. "She's here," says Staffe, striding across to the door, buzzing her in. "Sir," calls Pulford, sitting at his computer, "you've got to see this." Pulford pushes his chair back so Staffe can get to the screen. Staffe goes across, kneels down and rests his forearms on the desk. He leans right up to the screen. "Sweet Jesus," he says. "It's getting clearer." "Sorry to interrupt your porn, boys, but I thought it was urgent," says Josie, standing in the doorway. "Come and have a look at this," says Staffe. On the screen, the bottom right quadrant is demisting. Beneath the picture of the prostrate and butchered Carl Colquhoun, and to the right of the crucified Guy Montefiore, the outline shape of a house can just be discerned. "What's that in the background? A hill?" says Staffe. "Or a shadow," says Pulford. Staffe leans back, puts his hands on the back of his head and sighs, exasperated. "It could be anywhere. Why would they make it less obscure? Says Pulford. Is it a sign that something is about to happen? Or a red herring? They're in the driving seat, we're just guessing, says Staffe, standing up, going to the window again. What was the upshot of that trace on Jessop's account, Josie? Josie is peering into the computer screen, squinting. I'm not so sure. It could be a building. I asked about Jessop's bank account. If Jessop is our man, says Pulford, maybe they're using the website to distract us. Buy him some extra time. It reminds me of somewhere, says Josie, still staring at the screen. Staffe goes back to the desk, looks over her shoulder. Oh, come on, it could be anywhere. I've got a feeling, says Josie. A feeling I've been there. That dark area is a building, I'm sure of it. Why, it's too big compared to the one in the foreground. If it's nearby, says Pulford, we could go down there and see if we can see the camera. If I'm right, it's close. But Josie shies away from Staffe, stares out of the window. You have to tell me, says Staffe. If it's relevant to the case, I need to know. I have to know. We're a team, for God's sake. Staffe goes up to Josie and she hangs her head. Oh, I see. You don't know what trouble I got into for going to Vabber with you. Pennington threatened to pull me off CID. We're in this together. In what, sir? Says Pulford. It's a case that's solved. Lightly, Staffe puts his hands on Josie's shoulders. I'm asking you, Josie. Anything you can tell me. Anything. I'll only damage myself, I promise you. They're barking up the wrong tree. She leans in, peers, and the men gather round her. If I'm right, the building in the foreground is empty. What is the shadow? Says Staffe. I think it might be the lime kiln tower. Josie stands up, backs away from the screen, narrowing her eyes. And she tilts her head, unable to take her eyes off the computer. Remember the Martha Spears case? That's why I went. She reaches out, taps the screen. This is the street where the guy who raped her used to live. He was released last week. His name is Errol Regis. And there's no point rushing over there. Johnson came with me. We knocked on the door, but the house is empty. Why did you go with Johnson? That seems like overkill, says Staffe. Josie is dialling the station. The neighbours said Regis has gone. They saw the wife leaving. She had suitcases. There were no lights on, no sign of life, and the curtains were drawn shut. He missed a probation appointment too. John Baugh picks up at Ledengate, and she says, Sergeant, can you find out the address of an Errol Regis? He's a recent release on a rape. The victim was Martha Spears. Me and Johnson visited a few days ago. Thanks. Pulford says, This one's going to be live. It's like Absalom said, it'll be filmed on the web this time for everyone to see. Nobody's there, though, says Josie. There will be, says Staffe. Unless, like you said, it's a red herring, says Pulford. It's a swan song, says Staffe. But Jessop's out of the country. Here's his statements, says Josie, pulling a wad of papers from her bag. Staffe quickly scans each page. There's nothing here. That's all there is, going back 3 years. No payments in over £1,000, apart from his last salary. Staffe closes his eyes, says, J. Sir? Where's Jessop's confession? Read the last paragraph. Pulford unfolds the copy that Smethurst gave him. Someone showed how, and I had to follow. But don't follow me, there's nothing to be achieved. What's done is done. Well, that's it. What's that got to do with anything? Jessop didn't follow. He showed the way. He's written this note for someone else. He's protecting someone. Ruthie Merritt? Says Josie. Or Greta Cashel, says Pulford. Staffe picks up his coat. You monitor that screen, Pulford. Call me the second, and I mean the second, anything changes on that website. Who's going to tell Smethurst what's going on? Says Pulford. Nobody. I'm not sure about that, sir, says Josie. But her phone rings and Jombo gives her the address. Gibbert's Lane, she says. 18 Gibbert's Lane. Let's go, says Staffe, more his normal self. And keep stum for now. Stum, I say. The curtains are 3/4 closed, the way they have been for 2 days and a night, ever since they came knocking. 3/4 shut, and with the lights all off, it means he can see out but they can't see in. Even though he doesn't know who they are, Errol knows he can't afford to show any signs of life. It is beginning to go dark, but surely it's too early. He looks at the clock on the mantelpiece, which says 7:30. Teresa used to wind it religiously. He peers through the gap in the curtains into the gloom. The sky is dark. He can't see any stars in the sky. He pulls the chair up to the window, looks out on the angle so he can't be seen. Pulling the blanket up around his neck, he watches the fire next door. He feels sick in the empty pocket under his belly. The tar has been going non-stop, even though the council said there's no work down to be done on Gibbert's Lane. Not now, not in the future, they said, as if he was mad for asking. And he asked them if his wife had been in to get on the housing list. Teresa Regis, he had said. I'm afraid that's our business and hers, not yours, they replied. She's my wife. Then ask her. Soon, when he's sure Teresa isn't going to come back, ever, he will move on. Tonight he will stay awake with the phone in his lap until dawn breaks. Ledengate is still on redial just in case. Probation will be round before long, and he'll be sent back to serve the rest of his licence for the breach. At Belmarsh, the POs hadn't been happy to see him go, not because they liked him, but because they thought a 3-stretch was insufficient for a sicko, a frag, a fiddler. As he'd walked through reception on his way out, and carrying all his worldly in a clear plastic prison bag, they said, See you, fiddler. You'll be back for more, you fucking frag. The strangest thing about jail is the way they let you leave. One morning, and even though you know it's coming, it's like a kick to the balls when it finally does, you're taken to a small room and they give you the one prison bag. You get into the clothes you arrived in, all that time ago. In Errol's case, they hung off him. You even get your belt back, as if you're no longer a danger to yourself. You walk out across the yard without having to hitch your trousers, and you go into reception, where all the normal people come in and out. And someone opens a door, and the world is on the other side. Down the road there are buses and trees. Somewhere among the raging streets is a train station. You can go left, or right, or straight ahead. The air is all around. He knows he can't go back. Can't do another day. Even though the windows are shut tight, he can smell the tar. He used to like the smell, but he's learned to adjust. "Thanks for looking after Harry," Staffe said to Josie. "What did my sister say when she collected him?" He stares straight ahead, not even blinking. From here, behind the petrol station's condemned outside toilet at the top of Gibbett's Lane, and with the jacket of his collar pulled up against the long-forgotten chill, he can just see the windows of number 18. The curtains are drawn almost closed. The house is sandwiched between two derelict units. "She's got a temper, is all I'd say. I'd get her some flowers if I was you." You explained. You told her it was to do with Jessup." "That didn't seem to help. She said—" Josie bites her lip, can't help a smile slide into the corners of her mouth. "What did she say?" "She said you always had an excuse to make bad behaviour seem good." "Fine. That's just fine." "The boyfriend's kind of cool, isn't he? Is she younger than you?" "A year. And they're reasons, not excuses." Josie looks to the sky. "Did you feel that?" She holds her hand out as if to catch a falling droplet. Staffe looks above him, then up and down the street. "I can't work out where the camera would be, if this is the right place." Josie looks up and down the street, then up at the lampposts. She blinks as the rain begins to come down hard. Staffe doesn't stir, stares straight ahead. The sky is suddenly black, and even though this is the broken heart of the city, in the shadow of the lime kiln you can hear seagulls above. Their squawk gets louder and a feather drops, slow, to earth. "Let's go to the cafe," she says. "You go," says Staffe. "It's just there on the corner. We'll be able to see who comes and goes." "Okay." He doesn't move. "You coming?" He shakes his head slowly, without diverting his attention from the windows of number 18. Before the sky went black and the rain came, you could see the wall of the house next door, warbling behind the heat generated by the flame, keeping the tar liquid ready to go. Up and down the street, people come to their doors. They pick their heads out and look to the sky, hold out their hands. Staffe can't help himself from taking in the scene, a community coming together in the face of the elements, brought together by a crazy storm. Some of them are in their stocking feet, on tiptoes against the wet, or only wearing a thin shirt, crossing their arms across their chests against the sudden chill. People shout across their fences to neighbours with broad smiles on their faces. It is over a month since it last rained. Good for the gardens. Good for the water companies. But Staffe can't help thinking it will be bad for someone. He looks back to number 18. There's a car outside. He narrows his eyes, sees it as a small van. It wasn't there before, damn it! Through the rain, he can't see if anyone is in the car. Have they gone up the path? Staffe doesn't know whether to go to the cafe and tell Josie, or down to the house to see what's going on. He decides a middle way, to call her and stay put. If it's nothing and he races down there, his cover is blown. He feels the clock tick against him, but before he can make the call, his mobile rings. He lifts the handset to his ear, feels the wet metal cold on his ear, and hears Josie's crackling voice. She sounds distressed, but the line cuts dead. He calls her back, but now the line is engaged. Is she calling him back? He looks to the skies, and the rain runs down inside his collar. Maybe the van outside number 18 is the workmen coming to load up their kit because they'll be rained off tomorrow. He peers into the stair-rod rain, and a fork of lightning flashes in the sky. He counts the seconds to the thunder. On 4, the ground shakes with deep wrath. The storm is sweeping fast into the city. The mobile rings again, and Staffe has to shout to even hear himself through the storm. "Someone's come!" "I need you here," says Josie. "What?" "Come here." "No. You come here." "Staffe! Montefiore's missing." He can't help feeling he's doing the wrong thing. But Staffe ducks his head and walks into the rain, away from whatever is going on in the abandoned house of Teresa and Errol Regis. When he looks back a last time, the van is gone. The knock at the door makes Errol's heart stop for 1, 2 beats. He looks at his mobile phone, unsure whether to press Ledengate. Having stopped, his heart races to catch up. The pulse thuds in his eardrums. His fingers tremble. He stands, weak at the knees, and peers out between the curtains. The rain teems down, bouncing back up to knee-height. A small, thin girl with a pretty face is standing by his gate. She is young and smiles straight at him. Then she disappears. There is another knock at the door. The young girl isn't what he was expecting at all, and he doesn't know what to do now she knows he is in. Ledengate is illuminated on the screen. He puts the pad of his thumb on the green button ready to call and makes his way to the front door. Errol suddenly feels less gloomy than of late. This will be the first conversation he has had since Teresa left, the first face he has seen. He feels nervous, knows that is ridiculous. In the hall, Errol can see her waif torso outlined in the frosted glass of the door. He takes a deep breath and says a quick prayer that the visit might have something to do with Teresa. With one hand holding the mobile, Errol unbolts at the top and turns the key for the lock. When he opens the door, he can smell the rain washing the summer clean. The girl is smiling still. She has a collection box in one hand and extends it towards him. She shivers as she does it and says, "All right for cats and dogs?" "Cats and dogs." Now he smells sweet roasting tar. "It's the rain. I don't suppose I could step inside, just for a minute?" She shakes her head, and her high-up ponytail sends water spouting in a wide arc. Errol stands back, away from the wet, and she takes that as an invitation to come in, makes a stride onto the threshold. "No," says Errol. He holds out his hand and looks at the mobile. He watches as his thumb presses green. The girl's smile disappears in an instant, and she too raises a hand, not the one with the collection box. In it she holds a tiny canister. Errol looks at the screen, waits for the call to engage. "This is the police," he says to the girl, pleading. "I'm calling the police, now go. Go away, please." The girl shakes her head, looks angry now and says, "I don't think so." "Hello?" he shouts into the phone. The girl laughs a sneer and reaches out, points the canister at Errol's face. "Hello!" he shouts into the phone, but looking up at the girl. "Who are you? What do you want?" Errol is walking backwards now. He can't stop her coming in, such a tiny girl. How could he raise a hand to her? He's backed up against the understairs cupboard and wants to sink to the floor, curl into a ball and let the hurt come so it can go again. Her frown disappears, and as she smiles, he hears a hissing sound and a fine spray comes towards him. It stings around his eyes, burns his nostrils. He can't breathe, and when he gulps at the air, the acid burn gets into his mouth and throat. He can't see, and he throws himself on the ground, screws his eyes tight shut, fills his lungs and holds his breath. His head jolts, and a sharp pain shudders down into his spine. Then another, and another. He curls into a ball, tries to make himself small. The pain gets duller, cruel in his kidneys. He tries to hold on to his breath, but as the pain registers, he can't help himself. He wails. He tries to keep it quiet, trap it inside himself to preserve some dignity, but he fails. After what might have been seconds or minutes, she stops kicking him. His eyes still sting from the spray and his throat burns. There is blood on his hall carpet. He bought the carpet with Teresa. They almost had an argument about it, but Errol reined himself in. Errol squints up and sees the girl bent double, exhausted. Her hands are on her bare knees. She has a short skirt on, even though she's wearing heavy walking boots, built for the job. He looks further up and sees fat streaks of mascara all down her thin white face. In the newspaper, she'd worn a white hood and a cloak. When he makes this connection, he can't help himself, feels the wet spread of urine warm in his groin. She sees him looking and summons an effort to stand up straight. She spits down at him, and he closes his eyes again. He feels nothing, just hears the girls say, "Fuck me! Fuck me! Fuck you!" And she stamps on him, this time in the midriff. It knocks all the wind out of him. The last thing he hears before the darkness takes him is the girls say, "I am Sally, and this is from Martha." "What do you mean Montefiore is missing?" says Staffe. Josie is sitting at a table in the window of the cafe. "He insisted on going for a walk, told the officer on his door that he was only going round the block. That was 3 hours ago." Staffe looks out of the window and down the street. He can't see Regis's house for the rain. "I've an idea where he might be." "Where?" "Well, I can't say, in case I'm wrong." "What happened to us being a team?" He wants to tell her, to see if she might immediately come up with an argument to prove him wrong, something so obvious he can't see it. "I promised you I'll only damage myself." He pulls up the collar of his jacket, buttons it all the way and makes to leave. "I'll be an hour." "What about Regis's house?" "Keep an eye on it. Call me if anything happens. For God's sake, don't go in." "I'm going to call Smethurst. Tell him where I am." "No, you can't do that." "It's his case, sir." Josie stares out of the window, down Gibbett's Lane into the darkness and rain. "He's on our side." "He doesn't believe there will be a fourth. It goes against everything he's saying about this case. He doesn't want it. He'll go storming in and ruin everything. They're working to a different agenda." "Maybe it's you that's got the different agenda, sir." "Think what you like." "At least tell me where you're going." "Will you hold off from telling Smethurst?" "Where are you going?" "To Jessop's flat." "But he's gone." "That's what you said." Josie looks at her watch, says, "I'm calling Smethurst in an hour. Sooner, if anything happens." "Thanks," says Staffe, taking out his car keys. Outside, he ducks his head to the rain and runs full pelt for his car, wondering if the lie he has just told Josie may come to haunt him. He quickly calculates that it could cost him dear. The traffic is terrible, the way it always is when the rain comes. Nobody is walking, and taxis are everywhere. Staffe switches into pursuit mode. He overtakes and undertakes, constantly switching lanes and mounting the curb or going the wrong side of bollards. He switches on his hazards, and all the way along Holborn he drives through red lights with the heel of his hand pressed full to the horn. As he drives like a maniac, Staffe questions whether this could all prove to be a horrible misjudgment. A jump, feet first, into a pool full of mistaken conclusions. J, the recipient of the 50,000 from Vaba. J signing off the note that says he was showed how and I had to follow. Turn everything on its head, perhaps. Don't follow me, Jessup had written. The traffic slows to a dead halt, nose to tail with 3 lanes cramming into 2, so Staffe turns left down a no-entry street, switchbacking north of Oxford Street and through the Embassy Squares, to the sound and vision of blaring horns and abusive fingers. Then he's on the taxi cuts up towards Marble Arch and across Hyde Park towards his own place. He leans back, relaxes his hold on the wheel, begins to re-rack the evidence that led him to a final hunch that brings him snooping on himself, wanting to be right, but praying he is wrong. Staffe parks round the corner from his Queen's Terrace flat and breathes in deep. He calls Helena Montefiore. Why would Guy go walkabout when he knows the Avenger is waiting to catch up with him? Staffe can think of only one type of wild horse that would drag him outside. Mrs. Montefiore, it's D.I. Wagstaff, Ledengate. Oh. Can I speak to Thomasina? There is no response. Please? She's out. He can hear Helena's breath catch on the edge of her words. They told you not to speak to the police, did they? Are you involved? She says. She'll be all right. I have a feeling they're just using her to get to Guy. He looks down along his street. His curtains are drawn shut. He knows he left them open, and his heart leaps. Then sinks. A bright light glows beyond the curtains. I'm sure she's fine. He walks slowly towards his flat, heavy-footed. Are you there? He says, stopping, listening hard. He's sure he can hear her breathing, slow, even. You're not always right, are you, Inspector? The light within his flat seems unnaturally bright. Or is it simply that the storm's black sky makes it seem so? I have to go, he says, hanging up and putting his key in the door, urging himself to slow down. But his head is pounding, hands shaking. He can't make sense of what Helena Montefiore has said. The lock slides across, and he slowly presses open the door, goes into the communal hallway and leans back against the wall, cups his hands around his mouth and nose, taking back his own carbon dioxide. Staffe eases the door shut. The hallway is dark, but he doesn't want to use the lights, so he feels his way along, treading as lightly as he can. The closer he gets to his own oak door, the thinner the oxygen seems to be. He presses his ear to the oak, can hear something happening inside. He is sure there are low, measured voices. He can feel the rhythm of an earnest exchange. Or can he? He uses his Yale key and eases open the door to his flat. A bright band of white light shows under the closed door to the lounge, and he questions what his eyes tell him. The light seems ridiculously bright. He holds his breath, the better to hear what is going on inside. At least 2 people are talking, 1 man, 1 woman, maybe more. Staffe feels his thigh vibrate. Shit, he hisses under his breath. His phone is about to burst into ringtone, and he fumbles it from his pocket, retreating towards his kitchen. As he goes, the sound from the lounge diminishes, and he opens the door to the dark kitchen, goes inside quickly and closes it silently behind him, looking at the screen. Pulford is calling, and he holds the handset tight to his ear, cups his hand around the mouthpiece, and whispers quickly, I can't talk. He wonders what the hell he can do now, trapped in his own home. "The website's on the move," says Pulford. "It's switched to indoors. There's a body laid out on a table and a figure in a cloak, just like the Carl Colquhoun photograph." Staffe's mind races. He wants to tell Pulford to get himself down to Gibbet's Lane straight away and to alert Smethurst, but he daren't say anything. Figuring whoever is in the lounge will hear anything he says, he stays quiet, nudges inch by inch round the kitchen that is fed only by the storm's dark twilight. He reaches for his knife block, but it is empty. He opens the cutlery drawer, peers in. It is empty. "No knives," he says to himself. "Someone has made it a safe house." Pulford says, "I feel like I should go down there." "Jesus, what shall I do? Where are you?" Staffe cups his hand back around the phone and whispers, "I can't talk." A sound appears from somewhere in the flat, low and human. He presses himself to the wall behind the door. "I'm going down to meet Josie," says Pulford. "If you don't want me to, don't hang up. If you hang up, I'm going." Staffe closes his phone down and lets his arm drop to his side. All he can hear is the thud of his own pulse, the roar of his own tight breathing. He tries to fathom what to do for the best. He knows he cannot stay here, skulking in his own disarmed kitchen, waiting for the situation to come to him. So he steels himself, stands tall and opens the kitchen door, walks steadily towards the bright seam of light underlining the door to the lounge. It sounds as if the conversation is becoming more heated, and he pauses, with his palm wrapped on the brass handle. He twists the handle and pushes, walks quickly into the room, his arms taut, flexing at the knees ready to swerve or rush his adversary, but he is blinded by a fierce light. The room is floodlit, and Staffe has to blink his eyes open and shut to adjust. He squints and holds a hand up to shield the direct glare. His heart races to catch up, and he suddenly feels weak, slightly absurd. All he can see, when he has adjusted to the glare sufficiently, is history repeating itself. Strung up and gagged, Montefiore is lashed to a steel cross, a piece of wood jutting from the floor, and his trousers ruched around his ankles, his legs bound up and tied to his chest like trussed fowl. His mouth is stuffed with gauze, and his eyes bulge pleadingly. His cheeks are streaked with dried blood, the shape of blades, like the last time. Staffe wants to look away, but he makes himself watch as fresh blood trickles from Montefiore's eyes down his face. He can't help think that the man has had enough. He wants to die. They have finally got him to the point they wanted, a fate worse than death. Staffe turns quickly on his heel, checking behind him, but nobody is there. On the floor, by the fireplace, his portable TV broadcasts an unravelling drama. These are the voices he heard earlier. He feels a fool. Who's here? Who did this? He strides to Montefiore, reaches up to untie the gauze, and when he gets up close, he smells feces. He looks down, sees it on his floor, sees also that the jutting wood is inside Montefiore, God knows how far. Staffe can't believe that he could have got in here so easily. This makes him afraid, as though anything might be possible. What else has he overlooked or underestimated? What horrors might simply lie outside of his own abilities? He can't work out why Montefiore has been left like this, alone. Why do this? He weighs up the options, but he thinks he hears something shift behind him. He freezes. Before Staffe can turn around, Guy Montefiore convulses. He opens and closes his wild, bleeding eyes, and he shakes his head. Staffe's heart sinks. Montefiore is trying to tell him something. But Staffe knows already. He didn't check the bedroom. He senses a presence behind him coming closer in the same instant that he hears the voice. "Don't touch him. Don't help him," says the voice. Staffe recognizes it immediately. He turns, sees Johnson, as if he is seeing him for a first time, the fatigue replaced by a bright-eyed zeal. His sleeves are rolled up, as if he has been getting stuck into a job of work. He has thick forearms, big hands dappled with freckles. Johnson puts on a pair of black sunglasses and smiles at Staffe, watching the light hurt his eyes. "Sergeant," says Staffe. "You shouldn't have come," says Johnson. "You wanted me to, though, didn't you?" Johnson shrugs. He reaches behind his back. He pulls out a short, tubular length of steel from the back of his trousers. It gleams, looks freshly machined. Johnson lets the steel hang loosely down by his side. He taps the side of his knee with it. "I said you wanted me to catch up with you. Why the messages? On my car, in my flat?" "It wasn't me, that's for sure," he says. "Sounds more like Jessup." "You were in it together." Johnson laughs sneeringly. "That couldn't be further from the truth." "You can't do this, Rick." Staffe turns to look at Montefiore, shielding his eyes from the photo floodlights as he takes in the sight of a human reduced to its barest bones. "Don't for 1 minute think he deserves any better. The lives he's ruined, the things he did to Sally, and how many others have there been? To just kill him isn't enough." "Sally?" says Staffe. "What have you done, Johnson?" "OK, I'll wait for you," says Josie to Pulford, closing down her phone. "But it could be 20 minutes, maybe more, and judging by what Pulford has described as going on in number 18, that might be more time than they have." So she puts on her coat and leaves a £2 coin for the coffee. As she walks through the storm to Errol Regis's house, she palpitates, feels weak. She knows she should call Smethurst, but she promised Staffe she would wait an hour, and he still has half of that. Even so, she knows she should call. As she walks quickly down Gibbett's Lane, head down, the rain running inside her clothes, Josie takes out her phone and calls AMIP. Someone she doesn't know tells her Smethurst is out. "Unavailable," they say. "I need backup. Number 18 Gibbett's Lane, just behind the lime kiln." "What's the call-out?" "Suspected break and enter." "Well, that's not a CID call." "I've reason to believe a suspect for the Carl Colquhoun murder is on the premises." "That case is closed." "Speak to Smethurst. This is urgent." "I told you he's not here." "It could be another attack." "Look," the AMIP officer sounds uninterested. "I'll send a local unit round. Number 18, you say?" "Tell them to be quick." Josie ends the call and turns the phone to vibrate. She takes a deep breath and walks quickly, almost overshooting the house she last visited with Johnson. At Regis's gate, she sees that the bucket of tar has gone from next door. The butane flame is extinguished too. She goes up to his window, curtains now completely drawn, backlit by a strong light, and she immediately knows the house is occupied. As she draws back to knock on the door, she sees her hand shaking. She knocks, takes a half-step back and feels for her warrant card. The number 18 is cheap and askew. There is no sound of life from within, so she leans forward and peers through the mottled window panel. She knocks again, and a slender shape appears through the frosted glass. Whoever it is pauses and adjusts their clothes, then comes right up, sliding the lock across. The door opens slowly, and a small voice says, "Come in." Josie takes a step closer and crooks her head to see who has answered, but nobody seems to be there. "Who is that?" she says, her words cracking at the edges. "Come on in. You must be soaking." Josie doesn't recognise the voice, but she guesses it is a young girl, possibly in her teens. She relaxes a little and says, "Is your father in?" "Oh, yeah. He's in," says the girl. She takes another step forward into the dark, placing a foot in the doorway and pushing the door further open. Something stops it from opening all the way. "Don't let the rain in," says the girl. Josie steps right into the house, and the door moves sharply, knocking into her shoulder and slamming shut behind her. Josie shouts, "What the—" And then she sees the girl, smiling. It's a face she knows. The girl holds up a small canister, and Josie hears the shh of the spray at the same time as the jet of mist hits her eyes. It stings her nostrils and tastes acrid in her mouth. She begins to choke and falls to her knees. The last thing she feels, as she prays for the backup unit to arrive, is a rough fabric being pressed to her face. Staffe clenches and unclenches his fists. He could try to get out into his car, but, as if he knows his superior too well, Johnson smiles, says, "You know, there's nowhere to go, even if you could get out." He taps the length of steel against the palm of his hand. It slaps. "Pennington doesn't know what to think about your relationship with him." He jabs his head in the direction of the impaled Montefiore. "Very odd, wouldn't you say? And I'm guessing the alibis he asked you for don't quite come up to scratch." "You bastard." "I don't have to be. Not if you do the right thing, Staffe. Just let me get on with things. And Jessup takes the rap. Him? You. As long as this gets done." "And what about you, Rick?" "I'm sorted," says Johnson. He clutches his chest, coughs hard and dry. "But, before you go, I've got something you'll want to see." Staffe takes his phone out of his pocket. "One call from me, and a squad car will be here before you know it." "Try it. And anyway, what will they find?" Johnson sneers again, crossing his arms. The steel glistens bright in the white light. "Why, in God's name, are you doing this?" "Same reason you do what you do. Exactly the same, so don't kid yourself you're good and I'm bad. Nothing is black and white, you know that. We have no choice in what we do." "But it is black and white. It has to be." "Don't waste your breath, Staffe. And don't waste my time. I don't have much." "What do you mean?" "And don't do anything rash. If you do, I'll give the word." "Give the word? Who to?" Johnson coughs again, holding his chest. When he is done, his face is more gaunt, his lips more pale, as if he's suddenly got the wrong kind of blood running through him. "This bastard is going to pay." Johnson takes a stride towards Montefiore and hits him across the shins with the steel. Staffe is certain he can hear the thin crack of bone. He is frozen, has to watch as Montefiore whimpers. His head hangs. Where does this come from, Rick? How can you do this? Somebody has to. Somebody fucking has to when bastards like him shit on people. Shit on them and rub it into what's left of the lives that are left behind. And people like you do nothing. Nothing. There has to be people like us. Us? Empty your pockets. On that table, everything. Johnson reaches down and takes something from under the sofa. When he straightens up, he's holding a machete. He rubs the face of the blade up and down along the one rope which suspends Montefiore. Go on! Where's Thomasina? Asked Staffe. She's safe. Is her mother involved? I said, empty your pockets. Now! He presses the machete blade to the rope again. Staffe does as he is told. Wallet, warrant card, keys, change, all going onto the coffee table in the middle of the room. And the phone. Reluctantly, he takes hold of the phone. He looks at Johnson, knows that if he were to press green, he would get Pulford. But in the time he took to respond, what would Johnson do? And where is Josie? It begins to dawn on Staffe that he has missed his chance. So he pulls out the phone and looks towards the door. But Johnson immediately takes a step to his right and reaches out with a machete, touching the rope again. Staffe slowly places the mobile on the cob table that Carl Colquhoun had restored with such love. Johnson takes a step towards him. Stand by the window. Go on. As soon as he retreats, Johnson raises the steel high, brings it down on the phone, smashing it to pieces. The battery drops to the floor, and the marquetry on the table cracks like a smashed windscreen. Staffe slows himself down, clenches, unclenches his fists. What's the morphine for, Rick? You said you haven't got long. Don't pretend you're interested. There isn't just you to think about. Oh, don't you think I know that? I'm not selfish, Staffe. That's the whole fucking point. Who'll look after my children? Who'll stand up for any of the children if I don't do this? Johnson struggles for breath. You said there's something I'd want to see, says Staffe. Johnson nods to the kitchen, and as Staffe makes his way, he follows. As they go into the kitchen, he says, You know there's nothing in here. No knives or anything you can use. Open that. He points at the fridge with the tip of the machete. Staffe opens it, and inside sees the strangest thing, a laptop. Take it out. Open it up. Johnson struggles for breath. It's turned on, just click. Staffe taps the mouse panel, and the Victim Vengeance homepage glows alive. He doesn't know where the wireless is coming from, and clearly Johnson knows his neighbours better than Staffe himself, their passwords and their movements. He remembers the break-in, the sheer volume of time and energy and imagination that Johnson has devoted to this cause. The second quadrant is blank. The bottom right is now an interior, with a black man laid out on a table. His arms and legs have been lashed to the legs of the table, and he is bleeding from his face and legs. His trousers have been cut right up to the tops of his thighs. Lying next to him is an axe, and on the floor is a bucket. The tar, says Staffe. Is this Errol Regis? You do know your stuff. Jessup was right about you. Johnson's voice sounds different, muffled, and when Staffe looks up from the screen, he can see the DS is wearing a hood. He's taken off the sunglasses, and through the slits his dark, dead eyes show through, barely open. He puts lipstick on his mouth, and throws the steel to the floor. "Take it through to the other room. Go on." Johnson prods Staffe with the tip of the machete, and he carries the laptop through as if he is a butler with a tray. Once he is in the lounge, he looks closer at the fourth quadrant. In the corner of the room, a hunched figure is curled up on the floor under the window. Staffe leans closer to the screen, says, as if he can't believe his own words, "Josie? Is that Josie?" "She's been working with you too long, Staffe." "You bastard." "You should have done the right thing, Staffe. You should have shown more faith in justice than your precious law." "What do you want me to do?" "Put the laptop down." Staffe turns on Johnson, who takes a step back, holds the machete out in front of him. He takes 2 more paces and takes a hold of the aluminium cross. Montefiore makes a muffled whimper, and a trail of urine spurts onto the floor. "You sick bastard," says Staffe. "You don't know the half of it," says Johnson, coughing. "You don't know anything," he splutters. He points the machete at Montefiore. "You want sick." Staffe looks at Johnson, caught up in short convulsions. On his hood, where his chin would be, a thick seam of red begins to spread. "What's wrong with you? That's blood you're coughing." "Oh, you didn't notice, did you? All the years we worked together. Who's the bastard, Staffe?" "You should have said something." "I can leave this world in peace." "Leave? But what about Sally? What's her way out?" "Oh, you don't know what she was like without this. She's found peace." "You're deluding yourself." "And her too," says Staffe. "She came to me." "Why you?" "He wouldn't help." "Jessup?" "I knew what he did to that bitch Stenson. But he wouldn't do anything for Sally. I had to help her, you can see that, can't you, Staffe? What were we to do when Jessup lost his bottle?" "This hasn't got anything to do with bottle." "What would you know?" "A damn sight more than you think, Johnson." "You lost your parents. Imagine if that was your kids. But you haven't got kids. What if someone messed with your kids?" Johnson reaches down behind the sofa, looking at Staffe all the time. He tosses a white cloth at Staffe's feet. "Put that on." Staffe unfolds the white sheet, which turns out to be a cloak just like Johnson's, and a hood. He puts them over his head and inhales the fabric conditioner. It reminds him of when Sylvie was in this place. It reminds him that he is not ready to die, and he thinks about the line that connects us all. In this mad instant, he looks at Montefiore and Johnson and thinks of the line that runs through them to their children. The lines that are cut when we die. "What happened to you, Rick?" Staffe remembers poor Sian, the dead look in her eyes. "Don't you think it's a bit late for you to get interested?" says Johnson, reaching into his pocket. He pulls out a remote control. He presses it. "I need to understand. This isn't about you. Look," he says, nodding at the laptop. The second quadrant flickers to life, and Staffe can see a cross hanging from the ceiling of a brightly lit room. Montefiore's limp body strapped to it. The backs of 2 men, similar build, in white cloaks and hoods. You can't tell them apart. You're not going to get away with this. I don't need to. But what about your family? Don't talk to me about that. I've done the right things. Don't waste any prayers on me. And Sally? Johnson's body tightens up. Through the slits in his hood, his eyes blink fast. When I first met her, she wanted to kill herself. You know how long it took, after he stuck her, till she started fucking away around that estate? Do you? I'll tell you. A month. Johnson bends down, hands on knees, struggling for air. She was a star. A bloody star of that shit school. I spoke to her mother, Linda. Staffe remembers the gaps in the paperwork on the first Montefiore case. You stole the interviews. Destroyed the evidence. She died the night he stuck her. You know what he did? He waited. He waited till she woke up. Then he stuck her. He stuck her everywhere. He used a toy on her. And when he was done, he called her a whore. He said she was a filthy tart. And then he pissed on her. Staffe can't help himself from looking up at Montefiore. He tries to think of him as simply meat. Johnson says, but then she found me, and I found her. We've made things better. You have to believe that. He stoops again, gulping for air and wheezing badly. When he stands back up straight, he points with a machete at Montefiore. Well, look at him now. Look at the bastard now. Staffe looks Montefiore up and down. He tries to forget what Johnson has just said and imagines what Montefiore has suffered. What chances there are of finding some sort of treatment to remedy him? What chance to fashion some kind of justice? Johnson draws back the machete and sizes up the rope. Another spurt of urine falls on Montefiore's thigh, and Johnson laughs. Staffe holds his breath, and thinks of Josie trapped in Gibbet's Lane. His parents, in body bags in the hold of an aeroplane. Staffe holds the breath, still. He holds it, and imagines his blood turning silver. He closes his eyes, summons all his strength, and in one movement he stoops down, pulls a plug from the wall, grabs hold of the TV, and launches it at Johnson. In the same instant he screams, making Johnson look away from his target, and as the TV hits him full in the chest, Staffe takes 1, 2, 3 strides and throws himself at Johnson. They fall to the ground, and he hears the metallic clang of the machete's steel, loud, close by his head. End of Disc 9. Disc 10. Johnson is underneath him, the hood all askew, and he looks up. His arms are spread-eagled, and he still has hold of the machete. He brings it up sharply. Staffe sees it coming and ducks his head as sharp and fast as he can, full in the face of Johnson. He hears the slap of flesh and the cracking of bone. Johnson groans weakly, and the machete drops from his hand. Staffe leaps to his feet and kicks the machete away, puts his boot on Johnson's throat. But there is no need. He is all done in. He looks down at Johnson, pulls off the hood. Up close, and amidst the subsiding panic, he can see now just how grey his skin is, and everything begins to make a little more sense. What exactly is wrong with you, Rick? Says Staffe, lifting his boot from Johnson's throat. His gums and the inside of his mouth are brilliant red. As if you care. He coughs again and spits out blood. He turns on his side and draws his knees to his chest. "Are you in pain?" He nods and puts a hand in his pocket. Staffe watches him closely, picks up the length of steel and readies himself. Johnson pulls out a small medicine bottle. "It's terminal." Johnson nods. "And you're close to the end." "This would be a good time, you reckon?" Staffe reaches down and grabs the bottle off Johnson. "Let me ease the pain." "You'll want to say goodbye properly," says Staffe, knowing Josie's well-being hangs on the slender whim of Sally Watkins. "Call Sally off, and you'll get the goodbye you'd want." "Go to hell." "The goodbye Becky would want." "She's taken care of. Don't you worry." "Is that what the 50 grand was for?" Johnson looks up, a last blast of adrenaline feeding his shock. 50 grand won't get her and the kids very far. I bet you invested that money. Was it an insurance policy, Rick? Was it? That's none of your business. It won't be valid. Johnson sneers up at Staffe. Oh, it is. Trust me. Trust me. Is it a life policy? Even if you weren't diagnosed when you took it out, they won't pay if you commit suicide. What? Says Johnson. And believe me, if you don't call Sally Watkins now, I'll make sure the world thinks you committed suicide. You wouldn't do that. Try me. You couldn't. Staffe thinks of Josie, curled up in the corner down at Gibbet's Lane. Thinks of Errol Regis, too, and the terrible fate that awaits him, lying prostrate alongside the axe and the tar. A long, drawn-out death, another cycle of suffering and healing, a fate that is worse than death. He bends down, goes through Johnson's pockets and finds what he is looking for. A syringe. There's more than enough morphine here. Maybe you just couldn't take the pain anymore, or the humiliation of being caught. He puts his boot on Johnson's chest and takes the top off the morphine and depresses the syringe, making sure all the air is expelled. He puts the needle into the liquid and draws it up into the barrel of the syringe. There was only you here, Rick. I can remove myself from a scene just as well as you. I'll do it. Believe me, I'll do it. They'll find you all alone and pumped full of all this. He thrusts the 100ml bottle of morphine into Johnson's face. Leave her alone. Leave Sally, please. You don't know. Call her. Staffe bends down, his knee on Johnson's chest, pushing out a rattling wheeze. Johnson shakes his head, closes his eyes. Josie comes round slowly. A dull pain comes from her ankle, but when she tries to straighten up, it sears up her leg like a series of stabs. Now she is conscious. It is an effort to breathe. She slumps back to the floor, her face on the rough carpet. She can see Sally Watkins' heavy boots on the other side of the table. She can't see Errol Regis, but she knows he is there. It is his incessant, muffled moaning that awakened her. She inches herself onto her back so she can lift her head, straining to see what is happening. Errol is still laid out, stock still on the table. Sally is in a white robe and hood, and she is tightening the lashes that pin Errol to the table. As she makes her way around the table, she curses and spits at him. He is crying. Josie says, Let him have his say, Sally. She tries to struggle to a sitting position in the corner under the window. Her arms are tied behind her back, and her legs are bound at the thigh and ankle. She thinks her right ankle might be broken. Her skirt has ridden up around her waist, and she feels exposed. Strange in these circumstances, but she is embarrassed. He had his say in court. Don't you believe in justice? And he had his say when he done what he done to Martha. You seen Martha, have you? She's fucked, man. Fucked. Sally picks up the axe from the table and lets it swing by her leg. She moves round the table, picks up a saw. What will you do, Sally? Cut him off at the knee. As she says it, Sally shakes her arms and the heavy weaponry flails. The axe and the saw seem too heavy for her to wield. I know how. Then put the tar on. Stop the bleeding, see? So he gets it, long and slow, man. She paces round the table, wired, and Josie wonders what the girl might be on. But what will you do when it's done? Says Josie. She reckons that if she can keep Sally talking, the local response might get here in time. I've got somewhere to go. Don't you worry. Will you meet Jessup? In India. Sally laughs. You people are just shooting in the dark, right? She swings the axe and saw to punctuate her words. You can't kill him, Sally. I have backup coming. I called in before I came here. You should have waited for them. Go now, Sally, while you can. I got time. More time than you think. Sally puts the saw down and places her hand on Errol's leg, just above the knee. She holds the axe high. He squeals through his gag, and his body convulses as much as it can. Sally slowly removes her hand from his leg and holds the axe high with both hands. She plants her feet, square, and bends at the knee, setting herself like a boxer or a gymnast. Her breasts rise and fall against the robe. No! Shouts Josie. In the distance, a police siren whoops, gets louder. Josie curses AMIP, giving the all-clear for the locals to use a siren to cut through traffic, shaving a few minutes or so off their journey time. I told you. They're coming. Sally slowly lowers the axe and hisses at Regis. Don't worry. It's going to happen. I'm going to cut you up and stop the blood. You'll live for days, man. It'll kill you. The pain. She takes the saw and swings it through the air as if it is a toy. Then she uses it to cut into the curtain and tears a strip off. She reaches inside the robe and pulls out a ball of gauze. Josie says, We're on to you. We know Jessup's got Montefiore. D.I. Wagstaff's gone to get him. Sally laughs again and leans down, takes hold of Josie's face. You know fuck all. She squeezes Josie's mouth, forces the gauze roughly into her mouth, and secures it by tying the strip of curtain tight around Josie's head. Now, we'll have some quiet while they come and go. She switches off the lights and goes out of the room. The front door opens and closes, and when Sally comes back into Errol Regis's front room, she throws a number 18 on the floor. Then she tightens the gag around Errol's mouth and sits cross-legged on the floor, her head dipped, as if she might be in a primary school assembly. No sooner is she sitting comfortably than the police car doors slam. The footfall is steady. She hears the police knock, but it's too far away. There are voices raised in argument, then falling in a calmer trail of resolution.
Silly police. They gone to the wrong house. Someone must have got the number wrong.
Josie tries to work this out. She thinks back to how she came to know the house. She came with Johnson. But even if they had a bogus number, or even if the numbers on the houses have been switched, surely the police will check the houses either side. She tries to recall exactly what she had said when calling for backup. A break and enter is what she said. A connection to the Colquhoun murder, but no mention of Errol Regis. She should have referred to him by name, and she silently chastises herself, holding her breath, praying for the knock to come on Errol's door. A glimmer of torchlight shines across the window. She can hear the police talking, a few feet away on the other side of thin glass. It seems the storm might have abated. And Josie thinks that maybe this could be what God wants. She considers how it might be, that what Sally is about to do might be for a greater good. "What did they say?" says one policeman. "Break and enter." "You sure you got the number right?" "Of course I have. It's derelict by the look of things. There's no one in here. We can check back with the station." The voices fade, and the car doors open and slam shut. In the dim quarter light, Josie watches the headlights beam and curl away. Sally resumes her preparations. She says to Regis, "See? You got plenty time to suffer. Suffer like the children." Staffe puts the syringe between his teeth and takes hold of Johnson's arm. "You're going to call Sally, Rick." He slaps Johnson's arm with the back of his fingers. He inspects the red flesh for an emergent vein and slaps again. He takes aim. Can he kill a dying man? He feels sick, that he might be able to do this to a man he'd call a friend. Many times in their shared lives, Johnson had stepped in and saved Staffe. On the street and in station politics. You have to trust. That's how it works. Staffe moves the syringe quickly to the raised vein on Johnson's white arm and closes his eyes. Time seems to stand still. He feels resistance, feels the needle go slowly into the flesh, and Johnson's body goes stiff. Staffe's thumb begins to press the plunger, and Johnson wheezes, "Stop! Stop, you bastard!" Becky Johnson sits at the dining table, young Charlie on her lap, and Sian and Ricky at her feet, battling each other in a handheld virtual world. Ricky whoops, and Sian says nothing, as if there is no pleasure in it at all for her. And all the time, their mother stares at the computer screen with tears running down her face. She can see Montefiore trussed up and lashed to the aluminium cross, but wonders where Rick is, wonders when the man she loves will kill the child rapist. She prays with all her might for that salvation. She reaches down, runs her fingers through Sian's hair, and feels her daughter flinch, go stiff. When he makes it back to her, she will nurse Rick to death. God willing, they'll be granted the time to do that together. She hopes that everything he planned comes to fruition. "Oh, Rick," she says, full of fear, full of pride. "Why did it have to be you?" On the table by the side of the laptop is a pile of documents from the insurance company. She's been rereading them. Now the time is near, she can't believe there isn't some kind of loophole. But it is clear. Even should he be convicted and die in prison, the policy will still bite. It will reach out and comfort them, the family of a murderer. A serial killer is what he said it would be. How sweet the law can be sometimes. She remembers the way Rick smiled when he worked it all out, even though it was his life that was ending. She begins to sob, and Ricky reaches out to her. He does it instinctively, doesn't stop playing his Call of Duty with his free hand. "Don't mind me," she says to her children. "Just being silly again."
"Is Daddy coming home?"
says Ricky. She can't bear to answer. She doesn't want to lie more than she has to, which makes her wonder about the lies Rick might have told her. He swore that he got the diagnosis as soon as he could, that he didn't wait until the policy took hold. But how could that be true? She holds the baby tight, and she looks down at her eldest. Poor Sian. She looks at Sian, and she hugs young Charlie so tight that he begins to cry. She wants to hold Sian this tight, but she knows she can't. "You're hurting him, Mummy," says Sian. "Stop it, Mummy! You're hurting him!" Becky Johnson looks back to the screen, where Guy Montefiore hangs like a Scorsese Christ, and she wills her husband to stick it to him. For the children. "Will you call her?" pleads Staffe. "Call Sally. Call it off." The needle is in Johnson's arm, and Staffe's thumb is on the barrel. Johnson's eyes well with tears. He nods his head. Staffe takes his thumb off the barrel and says, "Give me your phone." He leaves the needle in Johnson's arm while he twists his torso, reaches round the robe and into his trouser pocket. He tosses the phone on the floor. Staffe removes the needle, stands up. He picks up the phone and scrolls down through the numbers, is amazed that she is there under Sally. He presses speaker, then call, and listens as the number beeps through the handset. They look at each other, listening as the phone rings, and Sally Watkins answers. "Who is this?" she says, sounding like a child who might have been caught off guard in an empty house. Staffe hands the phone to Johnson. "It's Rick. Have you started yet?"
"I was just going to."
"Don't, Sal. You can't."
"But I have to. There's a copper here too, that woman."
"Get out, Sally. Go where I said, remember?"
"I've got everything sorted, Rick. I've got time. The police have been, but they went to the wrong house, just like you said. I'm almost there."
"They're here, Sally. They've got me."
"But what about Becky? What about everybody? You said—"
"Careful what you say, Sal. People are listening."
"You said—"
"I know. We've done what we could."
"What will I do, Rick? This isn't what you said. I trusted you."
Rick Johnson's eyes glaze. Tears form quickly and fall heavy. "I'm sorry you trusted me. I'm so sorry."
"What shall I do?"
She sounds lost, alone. "Do what I said. Exactly what I said. And don't touch the policewoman." "Or Regis," says Staffe. "And leave Regis. Please, Sally."
"You're dying, Rick."
Sally starts to cry. "You be careful, Sal. Remember what we said." Staffe takes the phone from Johnson and steps away from him. "There had to be a better way, Rick." Johnson looks up at Staffe. "You don't know the half of it. You might think you do, but you don't." Where will she go, Rick? Staffe picks up the syringe again, looks at it quizzically, as if it could still administer some good. That wasn't part of the deal. No fucking way, Staffe. You can do what you like, but I won't tell you that. Sally comes to no harm. She's done no harm. You've got to be joking. It was all me. All me, and you can't prove otherwise. She's assaulted Regis and Josie. That's assault. She had nothing to do with the others. Staffe looks at the screen, tries to see what is going on down at Gibbets Lane, but the camera is on Regis. He can just make out Josie in the corner and the back of Sally crouching nearby. What if she does it again? Does what again? And anyway, she's among friends. What friends, Rick? Johnson's eyes lid down, and Staffe checks his pulse. It is slow. He calls Ledengate and tells them to get an ambulance here double quick. It's one of our own. I've got a DS dying here, one of ours. Johnson looks up. He tries to smile, but it collapses under its own weight. I trust you, Staffe. I do. His eyes close, and his great chest rises and falls in shallow, stolen breaths. Staffe taps the laptop's cursor pad, and the screen comes to life. He watches the Gibbets Lane room. Josie is struggling to sit up on the floor beneath the window. Her face is wrought with pain. Errol Regis is still laid out on the table. By his bare legs rest an axe and a saw. At his feet is the bucket of tar. There is no sign of Sally Watkins. Wednesday. Staffe watches Josie through the safety glass panel of her private hospital room. She turns, catches his eye, and appears to reset her mood, smiling weakly and batting her eyes. But as Staffe opens the door, making a magician's sweep with the flowers he'd been holding behind his back, he can see that she's been damaged. I'm out tomorrow. I said not to come. You look great, says Staffe. Liar. When did I ever lie to you? How's Errol? Just fine. Her smile fades, and she looks down at the scrunched-up blankets. He's never been fine. He didn't do it, you know. He never laid a finger on Martha Spears. He swore that to me, and I believe him. You should concentrate on getting yourself right. Staffe worries that after her ordeal, she might never be quite the same. I promised him I'd track down his wife. I said I would help. Have you had any joy? We've got our hands full looking for Sally Watkins. Do you have to, Staffe? She did this to you. There's nothing wrong with me. She drugged you and beat you. She tied you up and threatened to kill you. You're traumatized, for crying out loud. She's a child. We're not in the business of letting people get away, Josie. He thinks about what might have happened if he had brought Sally in for being underage and on the game. How is Montefiore? He's not regained consciousness. They don't think he'll make it. Josie looks as if she wants to say something, but decides against it. Her eyes are heavy. She sits forward and reaches behind her. Staffe rushes to her side and leans across, plumps the pillows. Her hair needs doing, and she has no kohl around her eyes, but she smells fresh and cool. He puts a hand on her shoulder feels her slide through him and back to the pillows. Her flesh is warm and soft.
"Thanks,"
says Josie. She takes Staffe's hand, holds it with both hers.
"Helena came to see me. Montefiore's wife. She asked me to do anything I could to help Sally. She said if there was anything I knew about where she had gone, would I keep it to myself?"
"Well, you told me Sally said nothing to you."
"Is Helena Montefiore involved?"
Staffe hooks his leg around a chair by the uncoupled intravenous trolley and drags it towards the bed. He sits down without taking his hand away from Josie's and looks deep into her eyes. Sally has got more friends than she knows.
"But she said she was alone in the world, all alone."
"They were looking after her. When I thought they were all tied into it, they were just doing their best to stop her."
"You mean Deborah Bowker and Greta Cashel?"
"Not so much Greta, but Ross Dennis too."
"You got him wrong, then."
"One act of kindness does not an angel make."
"Is that why he was round at Sally's that time you went?"
Staffe nods. On a cabinet by the window he sees a manila envelope marked by a fountain-penned S. Josie catches his eye.
"That's not you. It's a different S," she says.
"Would that be Helena Montefiore's handwriting?"
"It is a personal letter, sir, and like I said, it's not for you."
"You know it's a crime to protect a witness."
"How's Johnson bearing up?"
"Did you know he was so ill?" Josie shakes her head. Her eyes film over, and she takes her hands away from Staffe, draws her sleeve across her nose and puts her head right back, stares at the ceiling.
"Some friends we were."
"But what kind of a friend was he to us?" Staffe stands up, wondering quite what sort of friend Johnson is to Jessup. He shakes his head, puts his hand into his pocket, touches the letter that came yesterday. "Johnson is saying he killed Lottie Stenson too. His statement is very convincing."
"And what about Nico Cashel?"
Josie's eyes flutter. Her lids are heavy. "My guess is he's going to have to cope with a life on the outside."
"And Rick takes the rap for the lot."
"And then dies a natural death. It looks as though he'll get to take the truth to his grave," says Staffe, looking out of the window. Planes make criss-crossed white powder trails above the London roofline. His heart bleeds for Sally, running away. Ever since Montefiore raped her, she has only really been able to function when she was running at her enemy, plotting revenge. What will she do now? He checks his watch, sees he is running late for the flight. He puts on a smile and turns to Josie, but she is asleep. Her eyelids are dark grey, her lips pale and downturned like a sad clown. She doesn't look anything like herself. He looks at the manila envelope, marked S, and makes his way quietly around the bed, checking over his shoulder that nobody is looking through the safety glass panel. He picks up the envelope and looks closely at the S. He turns it over to see if there's any telltale sign, a crest or embossment, but all he gets is a waft of scent. He runs his thumb along the gummed flap, and as he does, something outside in the corridor crashes to the floor, makes a metallic sound. His heart stops for a beat, and Josie's head lolls to one side. Her eyes don't open, but his mind is made up. Staffe places the envelope back on the bedside table and leaves the room empty-handed but somewhat the wiser. Making his way down the stairwell at the back of the hospital, Staffe walks through vast slanting columns of light from the eastern sun. Way down in the car park, he picks out his E-Type and the waiting Deborah Bowker. She leans against the bonnet and blows out plumes of sun-dusted cigarette smoke. She looks up, shielding her eyes. It seems impossible that she might see him from all that way, but she waves an arm slowly. He will drive her to the airport, just as he promised, and he will try to prise from her the likely whereabouts of Sally Watkins. A part of him hopes she will not yield, but the bigger part thinks that he has no business in letting Sally off the hook. As he reaches ground level, Staffe pauses to let a cortege of wheelchairs pass. They're led outside by a nurse who has her embassy regals at the ready. Amidst the absurdity of the smoking cripples, he thinks of Jessup and takes out the letter that arrived this morning. Will, I truly hope there is no need for this. For my part, I'm long gone and hope to find some kind of peace. But I need your help, friend. Please believe everything Johnson says. Take him at his word, which will be close enough to the truth for most people. The more you believe him, the less harm will be done. I'm home clear, but you're not, Will, and there will come a time when you won't be able to live with yourself if you don't do the right things now. Suffer the children. Your friend, J. Staffe still can't quite make sense of it, and nor will he suspects, until he sees Johnson, who is across town in St. Thomas's Hospital. Word is he will die within hours rather than days, and Staffe knows that unless he goes soon, it is unlikely that he will get to speak to his sergeant ever again. The hospital said they will call if they consider Johnson strong enough, but they said not to hold his breath. That's exactly what the young doctor said as he handed across Johnson's confession. To everything, from Lottie Stenson right the way through to Errol Regis. The doctor had smiled, as if he knew the note was a granted wish, a thing of beauty.
"Don't take it all on your shoulders, Staffe," says Deborah Bowker, twisting the sole of her kitten shoe on the cigarette dimp and pinching the corners of her mouth with finger and thumb. "There's a whole legal system out there to make sure you don't fuck up."
He laughs and goes round her side.
"It's the V12,
she says, looking the jag up and down. Oh, you're into cars.
Carl was. He'd have killed for one of these."
Staffe puts the key to the door and lets her in. I would have picked you up from the hotel.
"That young pup dropped me off."
Pulford. She slides in and fixes her skirt as she wiggles to some kind of comfort. She pulls at the seat belts, but it doesn't work. Staffe leans across, and his cheek brushes against her hair. It tickles him as he jiggles the webbing of the seat belt, unsnagging it. He leans away, and their eyes clash as he clicks her in. I've seen your testimony. You saying Johnson admitted to you about doing for Colquhoun and Montefiore.
Don't forget Stenson. He did for her too.
And how would you know this? What connects you and Johnson? He manoeuvres the car out of the car park, sets them on a course for Heathrow.
How do any of us know each other? It's only through Vaber. As innocent as that,
she says in a light tone, but with a serious face. Her thin, pencilled eyebrows crease together. Vaber? How can I be sure you're not directly involved?
If that's a threat, it's not a very good one. You know damn well where I'm coming from.
She turns to face him, crosses her legs at the calf. She makes a down-turned prayer of her hands and slides them between her thighs. She lifts up her chin.
I made a new life for my children after what my ex-husband did. It was what I had to do. They needed a new future, not me going over the past, getting myself sucked in. I have to believe that good is stronger than evil, and good doesn't get to be stronger than evil by killing people. I come from the same place as you, Will. There's no place for revenge in my world, my children's world. She stares straight ahead, all the way to infinity, as if she is tuning out of what she is saying, thinking ahead to something else. You don't have to believe me when I say I'm not involved. I know I'm not. You believe in the law. I believe in the power of good. So why confuse the two, says Staffe. Help the law. Tell me where Sally is. Good things can come out of this. All I can do is look after my children. And Sally? Sally is a child. When did you last speak to Helena Montefiore? What makes you think I ever did? Or Ross Dennis? You might think Ross is a thug. She looks into her lap. And he might be, but he cares. He's not everything you think. If I don't catch up with Sally Watkins, she could do this again. She won't. She was hooked on it, Deborah. That's why you got the call to come over, to try and help talk her out of it, am I right? No. We tried to show her some love. That's not a bad thing, and it's certainly not a crime. Sally has been filled with hate for 3 years. Since Montefiore it has governed her. That's not going to change overnight. You can't put her in prison, is all I know. You can't. So it's all right to take the law into your own hands. She won't do it again. You know you have to tell me where she is. I don't have to do anything. The words catch in her throat. He looks across, sees that her lip is quivering. Did you know that Errol Regis never touched Martha Spears? He did 3 years because of people lying to the law, and he nearly died because of Johnson and Sally. Sally needs help, Deborah. I can't play God like this. It's just the law. It's the closest we have to good over bad. You've no right. Deborah Bowker presses her belt release and says, I've had enough. The belt is stuck. I said I'd take you. I'll stop with the questions. I don't believe you can. Deborah dabs at the corners of her eyes with the cuff of her blouse. 2 smears of black make dark gashes on the white silk. She's still in London, isn't she? I'm not saying, says Deborah, sniffing. She's with Helena Montefiore. Let me out. When Deborah Bowker gets out of the car, she busies herself adjusting her skirt and the sleeves of her blouse. Then she does her hair. Staffe pulls away, but has to stop at a red light. He checks Deborah in the wing mirror and watches her shoulders shake, dark tears streaming down her cheeks. As he drives away from her, Staffe is smothered by feelings of regret. All through this case, he has been amazed by the kindnesses and atrocities that people are capable of bestowing and inflicting on each other. He thinks now that he knows how this is going to pan out. But as he drives his father's car towards that end, he fears the worst, for the victims and for himself. Officially, Staffe is still suspended from the investigation, and although he made the connection to Johnson, Smethurst and Pennington are still fuming that he kept the cards so close to his chest. But what else could he do? What can he do now to make sure he's doing the right thing? By the victims. For justice. The cats are pretty much all out of the bags, and the endgame is being played out in public,
with more than one eye on the politics. This is Nick Absalom's domain. After everything that has happened in this case, why not go into the den, offer his head up to the mouth, and see what happens? "I can't believe Cashel is still insisting he kill Lottie Stenson," says Nick Absalom, running his long fingers through his hair and sucking on a cigarette in his seat by the open window on the sixth-floor offices of the News in Ravencourt House. A part of Staffe feels compelled to respect a part of Absalom, his devil-may-care. "What angle are you taking?" asked Staffe. "I think you know. But that's not to say I believe your D.S. Johnson did all this on his lonesome." Absalom flicks his cigarette out of the window, not caring how it falls to earth. "Sometimes you gotta follow the party line, hey, Nick?" Absalom lights another cigarette and swivels on his chair to face Staffe. "We're not so different, you and me. We get our hands dirty, but it's nothing like the grime at the top. Same in news, same in law, same in politics. It's a mad, mad food chain. Hey, Will." He laughs, but cuts it dead and leans forward. Fixes a look you could hook a fish with. "You and me both know it's all shit. I can't follow the line any more than you can, and it's killing me like it's killing you. We believe it'll be different when we get to the top." He leans back. "But will it?" He looks at his cigarette, inhales deep, blows the smoke into the room. "You can't help yourself, can you, Will? Even though you're suspended from the case, you're going after Sally Watkins, aren't you? And you know where Jessup is." "I haven't a clue." "That's only half an answer. She could be anywhere." "You could just let her live in peace," says Absalom. "And if she does it again?" "You know as well as I do that if you put her inside, she's more likely to do it again. She's nearly 16. In 3 months she'll be patted down with proper crims 24/7. It'll become a land of opportunity, and she'll be a hero in jail for doing what she's done. Does that make a better society? It will be law for law's sake." "Is that your headline?" "As you well know, I don't have freedom of expression on this case. If I did, maybe I'd direct myself to XDI Jessup for my headlines." "You haven't had any new messages," says Staffe. "Oh, you reckon they were coming from Jessup, not Johnson?" "I know nothing." "We'd have printed them." "Isn't there a party line, though?" "If there was, do you think I'd be telling a suspended detective?" Staffe stands up and turns his back on Absalom, deciding he has no information regarding Sally Watkins. "Straight down the middle, hey, Inspector? You can't help yourself." Staffe spins round on his heel. He wants to absolve himself, but he knows that if you reduce everything down, Carl Colquhoun and Guy Montefiore have caused all this. Without them, the crimes would not have dominoed. They should be the ones he is bringing to justice. He spits out the last of what he has to say. "I believe that Sally Watkins is a danger to herself and a danger to the world around her. I believe that if we catch her, we can give her help. She will be better off this way than left to her own devices, running scared, dragging herself up like some feral creature. I try to make the world more civilized, Absalom. That's where we differ. We're both involved in the truth. Don't forget that. And don't ever underestimate how much truth I've got stashed. I know it all." Staffe shoots out a hand and grabs Absalom's throat. He watches the journo's eyes bulge, and he thrusts his other hand deep into the inside pocket of Absalom's Paul Smith suit, pulls out a clear plastic bag. 2-3 grams, he reckons. He smiles at Absalom and tosses the bag out of the window. "You can't do that!" Staffe walks away, treating himself to a smile as he waits for the lift to come. He has just 2 more calls to make before his final visit. To Helena Montefiore, up in a grand confection of stylish living high on Harrow's Hill. Suspended or not, he will see Johnson. They can't stop him doing that. Looking up at St. Thomas's, Staffe tries to predict the reception he will get inside. He makes his way past the squad cars, showing his warrant card to the uniforms on the main door and outside the lifts. It's the press they're guarding against. But just as he thinks he's home clear to the 3rd floor, a uniformed constable holds out a hand. Staffe had shown him the warrant card, but the officer smiles, patronising. Before he can say anything, Staffe snarls through his gritted teeth and spits out the words, "That's my man in there. My sergeant. He's dying, and I have to make my peace with him. Now what kind of a bloody man are you, hey?" "I can't." Staffe presses his face right up to the constable and whispers, "Sometimes, just sometimes, being a decent copper is about what people can do, not what people can't do. Remember that. Now get the hell out of my way." The constable stands aside, and as he walks on, Staffe can hear the rustle and rattle of a radio being pulled out and used. But he puts that right to the back of his mind. Just about everything he believes in tells him that Sally Watkins must be brought to justice. In the same way, Nico Cashel must be released and Guy Montefiore protected. Even Deborah Bowker told him as much, even though it broke her heart to do so. And Helena Montefiore too must have figured out what he was likely to do. Why else would she visit Josie? Why else set down so red a herring as the letter to Sally? It all points him towards Harrow on the Hill. But he figures that, somehow, being with Johnson will give him the strength, show him a final sign. Johnson will point him the opposite way. He is the antidote. If Staffe is wrong, Johnson must in some way be right. He must prove Johnson wrong. Absolutely. Johnson was in Vaba, and Staffe rewinds all the visits he has made to Johnson's house, puts together everything he knows about that family. The faraway look in Sian's eyes, Becky locking herself away from her career and the world. He tries to work out how old Sian would have been when it happened, but he soon swallows that calculation away. He feels sick, wants to weep for his sergeant, wants to be punished for every break he ever denied him. He recognises a couple of Smethurst's men on the door to the ward. They look glum, as if they would rather be anywhere else. Staffe nods at them, and they nod back, bringing together their feet as they do it, too formal. One of them steps forward as if to stop him. I was his friend, for crying out loud. And outside Johnson's private room, Staffe sees Pennington, surrounded by a bevy of uniforms. He fears the worst. One of the uniforms nods and Pennington turns round. He is not glum, and nor would he be. The second he opens his mouth with his superior and faux grave words, Staffe knows that Johnson is on his way out. I'm sorry, Will. They're stopping the medication. He's too bad to take the chemo, and without that, it's too big to operate on. Where's Becky? Says Staffe. She didn't want to bring the children. Pennington beckons Staffe, sends the officers away. He whispers, she said her goodbyes, is what she said. I said we'd let her be. I got a WPC over there on the door. If she wants anything, we'll know. Has he said anything else? He doesn't want to see you, Will. Did he say anything about Jessup? About Nico Cashel? Can't you just treat him like a friend, a colleague, and leave you to control all the information? Be careful, Will, says Pennington. You've got a career to think of. I know you're upset, but don't patronise me, sir. Staffe takes a step towards the door to Johnson's room, and Smethurst flexes, looks to Pennington for a sign, but the DCI must think there is no more damage left for Staffe to inflict. It spells out how near the end Johnson must be. We've got all our statements, says Pennington. Let him make his peace. Staffe feels the bile surge up, from his belly up into his throat, and before he can help himself, he rounds on his superior. I'm not the coward, piling all the blame onto a dead man's shoulders. You... Smethurst steps in between the two detectives and leans on Staffe, his considerable bulk easing him towards the door to Johnson's room. Come on, Will, he whispers. This is between you and Rick now. Don't ruin it. He takes Staffe by the shoulders, fixes him a deep and penetrating stare. Tell him you forgive him, Will. Let him have his peace. Staffe nods and reaches out, pushes open the door. He sees his sergeant's eyes close as he enters the room, and he sits down between the feed station and the pin-pricked Johnson, 3 different goodnesses going into him. He takes a hold of Johnson's hand, careful not to disturb the intravenous tubes. He waits for his sergeant to look him in the eye, and he leans forward, says in a soft voice, I want to say sorry, Rick. His voice begins to crack. I should have been a friend. You should have been able to come to me. It's not... Johnson can barely speak. I know about Vaba, Rick. It was Sean, wasn't it? He nods, and tears fill up his sad, pale eyes. He sets his jaw. And you never found out who did it? He shakes his head, one way then the other, just the once. I took her shopping. It was Christmas. So packed. So many people. I had her and Ricky. He begins to sob, and Staffe squeezes his hand as much as he dare. We were having another. Becky was at the hospital. Staffe can't hold it back. His jaw goes slack and he feels his lips lose form. His eyes become wet and he leans forward, puts his head on Johnson's chest, feels Johnson's hand on the back of his head. He tries to find the words that would offer the forgiveness that Smethurst talked about. We had Charlie, but I lost my life. I couldn't love my baby. Staffe waits until he thinks he can speak without breaking down. He wants to ask Johnson if he really did kill Stenson, but he thinks he knows the answer. He will find out by checking Becky's hospital visits, but he's sure the records will show it was after Stenson died. Johnson already said it was Christmas. Without looking up, he says, You got your life back when you met Sally. That's right, isn't it, Rick? For a while, you got it back. Johnson doesn't reply. Staffe looks up and sees his sergeant staring, wide-eyed, into the light. He runs the palm of his hand over Johnson's face, checks to see his eyes have closed, and he leaves. Two squad cars are parked up at the bottom of the block of flats off the Holloway Road, and Staffe shows his warrant card to gain access to the tenement. He feels ashamed that this cramped and tatty flat is the best a detective sergeant can do for his family in this day and age. As he climbs the stairs to Becky Johnson's floor, he tries to formulate a first sentence he might say to her. He comes up blank. Outside the door, one of the Met's WPCs stands guard. She pushes a palm out at Staffe and says she knows who he is and she doesn't give a toss he's not going in. "No way, sir. I'm sorry." Staffe turns his back on the WPC and looks down at the Holloway Road. If he leans out, he can almost make out the line it cuts north up towards Archway. Harrow on the Hill is way beyond, but he needs to know what to do when he gets there. He turns back to the WPC and feels the muscles in his face become weak. His voice sounds soft and low, and as he speaks, he believes every word. "You know, I worked with this woman's husband for 3 years. I could have been a lot kinder to him and to her. I could have given him more time. His wife in there." Staffe jabs a finger at the door to the flat. "And those children have suffered for what the force has made them do. And now I need to say these things to Becky Johnson. I have to explain what happened, so she can understand that what her husband did has a purpose. It still has a purpose." "I don't really know what you're saying, sir," says the WPC. "She is a mother. She has to bring those children up in this world. I need to tell her what'll happen next. She needs to know. And I need to hear from her what she wants to do next. What she says to me has a bearing on what I do with this case. If that was you, would you want me to hear you or to plough on regardless? What do you think she deserves?" The WPC nods, says, "I'd love to let you in, but—" "Thanks," says Staffe. He wraps the palm of his hand around her elbow and squeezes gently. He looks her deep in the eyes. "Just give me 5 minutes. You can trust me, I promise." And he opens the door, makes his way into the flat, holding his breath as he goes. It is deathly quiet. He presses open the door to the lounge as quietly as he can. The curtains are drawn, and there is a blue-white wash to the room from the TV screen. He can't see the picture because of the angle, but the sound is turned down, and Staffe looks around for signs of life. He makes his way in, so slowly, and sees the back of Becky Johnson's head peeking up from an armchair in front of the TV. "Becky," he whispers. There's no response. As he moves around, his eyes pinned to her chair, he sees that she has Sian on her knee. There's no sign of the 2 boys. Sian is asleep and has white music buds in her ears. She has an arm wrapped around her mother's neck. Her face is squashed, and he can't discern whether she is at peace or perturbed in her slumber. Becky also seems to be asleep, at first sight. But when he looks closer, he can see her eyes are half open. Her face has a fixed expression of mild amusement. He moves closer and crouches slowly. He takes her wrist in his hand and watches her face for signs of life. As he touches her, there is no change to her expression, yet the pulse is strong. He looks into her eyes, and there is the faintest registration of life. He looks deep into them and follows what they are fixed upon. And there on the moderately sized LCD television screen, are the moving images of Carl Colquhoun writhing in agony. Staffe can't take his eyes off the screen until Becky's husband takes out the scalpel, goes to work on Carl's testicles. He scrunches his eyes tight shut when it gets to the part when Johnson had turned the blade to Carl's eyes. By the time Staffe opens his eyes, the subject has changed. Guy Montefiore is strung up, bleeding from his eyes. Staffe looks at Becky and gasps. She is looking straight at him now and smiling. She says nothing. Staffe looks down at young Sian and sees that her mother has the wherewithal to rest the palm of her hand over her daughter's eyes in case she should wake. "Becky?" he says. She says nothing. Ever so slowly, she turns her head to the screen, and as Guy Montefiore jags down onto the wood, her smile becomes infinitesimally wider. Staffe goes across, leans slowly over the wing arm of the chair, and kisses Becky Johnson on the forehead. He hopes to God that she will tire of reliving her husband's work. And as he makes his way out of the flat, he makes a prayer that he is just a little bit wiser. Staffe feels sure that he knows what to do. He wishes he wasn't quite so alone, but knows that this is no kind of decision for Pulford to take, and Smethurst and Pennington's interests are too vested. They have their man. He's not the one either of them would have wanted, but he is dead now, and they can begin to pile on the guilt like earth to a coffin. He feels alone, dreadfully alone. But not for long. Sitting on the bonnet of his E-Type and swinging a set of keys around on his forefinger, as if there might be a revolver, is Ross Dennis. He looks sharper, cleaner, and somehow more capable than when Staffe first came across him in the rag. Dennis is wearing a suit jacket and twisted jeans. His hair is waxed and he looks handy, smiling at Staffe as if he has nothing in the world to fear from this officer of the law. "Get off my car!" calls Staffe. Dennis doesn't shift an inch. He says, calm as you like, "There's no need. You're not going anywhere, not till we've had a chat." "I'll go where I want and when. It's nothing to do with you. I could still have that racial incitement pressed, you prick." Dennis laughs. "I'm no prick, and you're no fucking hero. And that's why I'm here, to make sure you got that straight." He stands up, probably measures a couple of inches taller than Staffe, a good 10 years younger. His scars are more pink, and Staffe can't work out if this is a good or a bad thing. For sure, Dennis has enough violent form, most of it gratuitous, and he would be a firm favourite in anybody's book. "Move away from my car. I need to go somewhere." Dennis moves to one side, sweeps his arm like Walter Raleigh and says, "Making the children suffer just a little bit more, hey?" And he registers the look of shock on Staffe's face. He slowly spreads his arm like an angel of the north and kicks out with his winkle-picking foot, straight to Staffe's groin. Staffe bends double and sinks to his knees. The rough tar of the road cuts his knuckles as he falls, and he gulps for air. "You must be very proud of yourself, Inspector." He looks up at Dennis and sees him smile down at him, crossing his arms across his chest as he stamps down on Staffe's torso. "I've got the measure of you, Dennis." A sharp pain jags into Staffe's lungs as he talks, and he thinks Dennis might have cracked a rib with the heel of his winkle-picker. "You think you're some kind of vigilante, cleaning up the streets, hey? But you're a thug. Just a thug. Doing your job for you is what we're doing." "We?" Dennis furrows his brow and kicks out at Staffe's head, but he manages to roll away and takes a blow on the shoulder. He scuttles away on his backside, up against the tyre of the E-Type, and Dennis walks casually after him, still towering above. "She's a good kid, Sally. Only thing she done wrong was getting away that dirty fucking nonce. And you want to send her down, you fucking muppet." Staffe looks into Dennis's eyes as he talks. He believes that he believes what he is saying. There might be some greater cause to be fought behind the common violence, but Staffe sees something else. It is something he sees 10 times a day, on a good day. He tries to take in lungfuls of air, readying himself for the next blow, but each pocket of air pushes his lung into the cracked rib. He feels as if he might faint. "You hate me, don't you, Ross?" "Why should I?" "I'm police. I'm a pig. I bang the good people up. Let the nonces get away. I'm on your case, aren't I?" The words wiped the smile off Dennis's face. "And I'll get you, Ross. I'll send you down." Staffe watches Dennis plant a sharp-toed shoe, ready to swing the other at his head. He wills him to do it. "You prick," he says, readying himself for the contact and focusing all his energy on the whoosh that precedes the instant that the material of Dennis's low-weave jean hits his raised arm. It comes, the whoosh, and when it does, Staffe rotates his arm hard and fast. He feels a bone crack, but he also sees Dennis's standing foot skid upwards. He watches Dennis struggle to keep his balance. Staffe pushes himself up against the jag and off the ground, and he throws himself at Dennis. He knows that if this struggle lasts any time at all, he's done for. So he dives at Dennis's face with his head. He feels the schlock of bone on flesh and pulls his head back for another go. But he sees Dennis smile, as if he might have something up his sleeve. Their faces are close up, and he can smell Dennis's breath and aftershave, sweet and leather. Beneath him, Dennis's body shifts, as if he is manoeuvring to get to a weapon. A knife? A gun? And Staffe knows he has to end this soon. So he opens his mouth as wide as he can and thrusts his face at Dennis's, biting hard into Dennis's cheek. He brings his teeth together until he can taste a vestige of blood. He watches Dennis's eyes go wild with pain, and he brings up his hand, rams his big fingers into Dennis's eye sockets. He doesn't just hit the eyes, he hits through them, as if his own sight depended on it. And he rolls away. He rolls away and he stands, slowly, looking down at Dennis holding his head, hands over his eyes and wailing, curled up. There is no sign of a weapon, on the ground or in Dennis's pockets. Jessup taught him that trick. Taught him that sometimes you have to distill all the violence you're capable of and pack it tight into a couple of instants, especially as the years roll on by. He takes the E-Type's keys out of his pocket, puts them in the hand at the end of the arm that feels as if it's fractured. Simply making a weak fist to hold the keys brings tears to his eyes. But with the other hand, he takes a hold of Dennis's hair and he drags him along the rough tar. He knows Dennis is a more complex character than he first thought, but there's no time to investigate that now. He needs a clear mind and knows he must neutralize Dennis. Staffe opens the boot and lifts Dennis's blinded head one more time, kicks his backside and watches him tumble headlong into the tiny boot. With the heel of his Chelsea boot, Staffe stamps and stamps at Dennis's torso until it finds a way to fold itself into the minuscule void. Then he slams the boot shut and locks it. He sits on the boot and looks at his forearm. He needs to go to hospital, but is certain that time is against him. Dennis was here to stall him for a reason, and when Dennis doesn't turn up, wherever, they will know to close the door on him. He reaches into his pocket with his good arm and takes out the 100 ml of Johnson's morphine and plunges the needle into the solution. He presses the syringe's plunger, expelling the air and squirting the solution high into the air. He lets most of the liquid out, just leaves himself a modicum, knowing this is a fine balance. If ever he needed his wits. Helena's garden is a lovely thing, but it is not made for security. The willows weep so low that Staffe can scuttle along the path to the sound of birdsong, and out of view of the drawing-room without getting within 30 yards of the house. He takes a wide arc around the perimeter of the herb garden and down along the side of the house where there are no windows at all, save the frosted glass of bathrooms. The pain has returned, but he swallows and incants a mantra. It does some good, but the morphine is better. However, he doesn't want to impair his judgment. All being well, just another 10 minutes and his work will be done. He will be able to get a cab to the nearest A&E and put in a call to Harrow Nick, saying that they should look for an E-type Jag in the staff car park of the holidaying school. A Ross Dennis can be found in the boot. The keys are in the exhaust, and under no circumstances should the officers involved use force to gain entry to the car. This is what he wishes for. Just a few minutes more. When he gets to the side of the house, he crouches as he makes his way back around the front, below window height. Once he gets to the French windows of the drawing-room, where Helena Montefiore had received him and Pulford those few days ago, he takes pause. He can hear voices, even though the doors are closed. The top panels to the side windows are open, and he can hear the sing-song, cajoling poshness of Helena. He thinks he can hear her say, "Tommy," but that is not the name he came to hear. He suddenly considers how foolish he will seem if Sally Watkins isn't here. He waits and waits, but still he doesn't hear Sally's name. Helena talks to Tommy's friend, a girl called Georgie, and Staffe begins to curse. As a last ditch, he decides to venture further round so he can see into the room and take one final look before he makes good his retreat. He inches forward and peers into the room, hoping that nobody is looking his way. And he is in luck, in one way. The three women sit around a coffee table. It seems that they're looking at a map. They all appear to be happy, and they smile, look lovingly into each other's eyes. Tommy talks with her hands, and Helena answers back with her hands. They're like a mirror image. Georgie, hair short-cropped and black, just like Tommy, has her back to the window. Helena stands up and goes across to the sideboard, comes back with purple-covered booklets, and the two girls snatch them up, read them from back to front, cocking their heads and rocking to and fro, laughing at each other. It would seem that Helena Montefiore, rather than harbouring a criminal, is planning to take her daughter away from it all. While her husband lies dying in a London hospital, she is keeping it all from Thomasina. And who can blame her? Staffe trusts his judgment. He is pleased to have taken an instant liking to Helena Montefiore. He prepares to knock on the window, wish her all the best, when Georgie jumps up and turns to the window. Georgie looks straight at Staffe, and her mouth drops open. What little colour there is in her pale face quickly drains away. Staffe's heart stops, and he looks behind him to see what it is that has spooked Georgie so, but there is nothing there. When he turns back to face into the room, Helena has an arm around Georgie. Georgie, with her freshly cropped and dyed hair. Georgie, with her brand-new name and her new passport and her new life. Staffe looks into the eyes of Helena. They narrow, and she makes the faintest, imploring smile. Then he looks at Sally Watkins. There is a new life, a new brightness in her eyes. He looks at Thomasina Montefiore, who is about to burst into tears. And finally he looks back at Georgina. She smiles like he's never seen her smile before, and in the instant he decides to walk away, she blows him a kiss. As he turns, the three women embrace and make a tight circle. Walking away, he hears them crying. It is a happy sound, and by the time he is in the shade of the weeping willow, it merges with the bird song. Staffe goes through to his bathroom in Queen's Terrace, takes out his running gear from the Adidas bag and runs the shower. The water jets down hard on his scalp and shoulders, and Staffe turns the heat up a notch so it almost scalds him. He scrubs and scrubs, the smell of coal tar getting thicker and thicker, the steam getting more and more dense. Tonight, he will run west in the dark, and the river will be silver in the moonlight, and it will curve to meet him at Putney Bridge. He will leave it to run into the deer park, but it will find him again on the other side of Kingston Gate, closer to its source. Back in time. Suffer the Children by Adam Creed. Read by Jonathan Oliver. Thank you for listening to this unabridged Oak Hill audiobook. If you would like to listen to further titles, please contact your local library.